Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. November 21st deadline nears to register online for economic impact payment. Some people can claim special credit next filing season. IR 2020-257, November 17, 2020, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service today reminded anyone who doesn't normally file a tax return that they have until 3 p.m. Eastern Time this Saturday, November 21st, to register with the IRS for an economic impact payment, an EIP. There's a link to the economic impact payment at this time. Let's just give a quick recap of the economic impact payments as they've been going out this year. The economic impact payments are a form of stimulus payment for 2020. They basically tied the stimulus payment to the 2020 taxes, which will basically be actually filed in 2021. But they based the payments on, then they looked at, in order to send out the payments, the prior year tax returns, that being 2019 if filed, if not 2018. So they used that information to send out the economic impact payments. Now, if a tax return was not filed for 2019 or 2018, then they may still have sent out an economic impact payment based on other types of payments that are going out from the government, such as Social Security type of payments and whatnot, because then they have the information at least that someone is, a citizen, that they're getting these types of government payments, and they know where to send it, so they could send out the economic impact payment in those cases. In situations where they don't have a tax return, 2019 or 2018, and they don't have any other way to send out the economic impact payment, then they're asking for information in those situations. Now, if you haven't filed a 2019 or 2018 tax return because you're required to, but you just didn't file it, then you typically want to file the 2019 or 2018 tax returns. However, if there's individuals, or if you know of individuals that have not filed 2019, 2018, and have not received an economic impact payment from some other way, meaning the government hasn't been able to pick up some other form to be able to process the economic impact payment, then those are the people that the IRSs are looking to get to at this point in time, to use this non-filer enter info here tool, which will be easier than processing a tax return, and it'll be faster. So those individuals could use this tool, hopefully, and then get the economic impact payment in 2020. If they wait till after November 21st, then they'll actually have to file the tax return for 2020 in 2021 in order to receive the economic impact payment at that time, which will take longer, of course, to do, and it'll probably be more burdensome given the fact that you'd actually have to file a tax return for people that don't typically file. So that's kind of the recap of where we are at. So the current deadline is November 21st that the IRS is pushing to try to get anybody access to the economic impact payments who should have access to them as early as possible in 2020. So here we go, back to the text. The only way remaining to get a payment in 2020 is to register using the non-filer enter info here tool. There's a link to that here. It's also on the IRS.gov website before statutory deadline. The only people who should register are those who don't typically file a tax return, are not required to do so, and have not yet registered, or for certain benefits recipients who got an economic impact payment for themselves but need to provide information about non-beneficiary spouse or qualifying child. So it's possible then, the only people that are looking for this tool, that would be using this tool, is if they haven't got an economic impact payment, you haven't gotten it because you didn't file a tax return and they couldn't find some other way to give it to you, and you don't need to file a tax return because you're under the threshold. That would be for like an individual. But you also may have gotten a payment, but it's too low, meaning possibly you got $1,200, but you didn't get something for your spouse. Maybe you're married and the IRS doesn't know about that, and so the spouse didn't get the payment. So then you might want to use the tool in that case, or you might have a qualifying child, one that's a dependent, typically one of the qualifications being typically under the age of 17, and haven't picked up the payments related to the qualifying child. That could be another situation. Back to the text. Anyone else who normally files a tax return, including low and moderate income workers and families claiming the earned income tax credit and child tax credit or other tax benefits, cannot use the tool. So if you're making amounts under the threshold to need to file a tax return, that doesn't necessarily mean that you do not want to file the tax return, because if you're under the threshold to need to file the tax return, that just means that you don't owe any taxes. But filing the tax return would help you to get any refund if you did have some earned income and withholdings on it, And even if that amount is low, many people in that situation would still qualify for what we would call refundable credits, those that will go past the point in time of just simply giving a refund, but rather be like giving more money back. So it wouldn't really be a tax at that point. It'd be kind of a benefit program at that point. So, and those would be the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. So if you want to file the tax return, then you're going to have to file the tax return. It's only the people that aren't filing the tax returns that would typically be using the non-filer tool. So in partnership with the U.S. Treasury Department, the Bureau of Fiscal Service, Social Security Administration, and the Department of Veterans Affairs and software industry partners, the IRS has issued about 160 million economic impact payments totaling approximately $270 billion. Under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, the CARES Act, the IRS will continue issuing these payments during the final weeks of 2020, and some people may be eligible to claim them when they file their 2020 tax returns in 2021. Anyone who can check the status of their payment by using the Get My Payment application, there's a link to that here, available on the IRS.gov website, the IRS website. The Get My Payment application will show, quote, payment status not available, end quote, until payment is scheduled to be issued. This response does not mean a person is not eligible or will not receive a payment. So it just means it hasn't been processed, it looks like, right? If it says payment status not available, it doesn't mean it just means it hasn't been processed yet, is my take on that. So economic impact payments aren't taxable. Economic impact payments received in 2020 are not taxable for federal income tax purposes. So they're not going to be something included in income and therefore being paying taxes on the economic impact payments. They're a benefit type of payment. Taxpayers can claim the recovery rebate credit on their tax return, tax year 2020 tax return in 2021 if they didn't receive a payment or if their payment wasn't the correct amount. So if we go through 2020 and there's some problem with the payment, either you haven't received it or you didn't get the full amount, possibly because the spouse wasn't included or possibly because you had qualifying children, then the idea that the IRS has is that they're gonna weed all those things out or fix all those kind of problems when you file the tax return for 2020 in 2021. So you want to make sure you have all that information together, and if there's a problem, particularly to have that information together so that hopefully you can fix it in the filing of 2020 taxes in 2021. Didn't receive a payment? Claim the recovery rebate credit when filing a tax return next year. When people file their 2020 taxes next year and they weren't eligible for an economic impact payment this year, they may be eligible for the recovery rebate credit. The recovery rebate credit is figured like the economic impact payment, except the amounts are based on tax year 2020 instead of tax year 2019 or tax year 2018 information. So now they're going to be tying it to 2020. So obviously when they sent out the original economic impact payment, they had to use 2019 or 2018 taxes. And I think about it basically this way, that they tied it to 2020, which is going to be filed in 2021, and then they used 2019 and 2018 as like an estimate to actually process the payment. So it should be an easy thing to process because basically all you need to qualify is to be basically a citizen, right? So it should be an easy calculation to make, but we see these some kind of problems that are in there, including the qualifying child and these type of things, and people that are dependents, and then they stop becoming dependents and whatnot. So then that means that in 2020, any problem that took place then should basically be able to take care of it by filing the tax return in 2020 and basing the information on the 2020 tax return. And we've seen problems like this, like for example, if the qualifying child wasn't on the return or wasn't on the 2019 or 2018 return, but there is one, say someone was born in 2020, then you would think that they would get a changed credit in 2020. Or for students who were dependents in the prior year, for example, but they're not dependents in the following year in 2020, then possibly they would then qualify for the credit, whereas if it was based on the 2019 tax return, they would not, because they were dependent, and the parent wouldn't get any benefit from it because they were over the 17, threshold and so on. So everything is supposed to basically kind of wash out here in the 2020 filings. If there's any problem, you should be able to file it in 2020, base the information on the 2020 tax filing that's filed in 2021, and fix any kind of the problems with the calculations that were based on prior years. So the eligibility criteria are the same, and the maximum credit is $1,200 or $2,400 if married filing jointly, plus $500 for each qualifying child. This means anyone who received the full economic impact payment amount during 2020 for both themselves and their qualifying children cannot get the credit. So, I mean, obviously, if you already got the money, then you can't get the credit. The point of the credit is basically to give the money to people that had not yet received the economic impact payment. It's kind of there to reconcile any problems that happened with the distribution in 2020, which was based on prior year tax returns. So the credit can be claimed on either Form 1040 or Form 1040-SR. The 2020 instructions for these forms will include a recovery rebate credit worksheet to help determine eligibility and figure the credit. Visit the IRS Economic Impact Payment Information, there's a link to that here, Center, for answers to questions about eligibility, payment options, payment timing, and more. So once again, there's a link to the Economic Impact Payment Information Center here. There'll be a link to this in the description.